time. And when I realized that they were thrown from the car, I started screaming, I killed my kids. I killed my kids. I killed my kids. And that was just a really devastating experience. But hi, I'm Julie Cluff, and I am currently a grief coach and a um, spiritual teacher. This has all come from my experiences. I'm a mom and a grandma, and I live near Nashville, Tennessee. But my story, my current story, begins in 2007 on Mother's Day. On Mother's Day in 2007, I was traveling across the country with my three youngest children. And my son, James, was 12 at the time. My daughter, Carrie, was 10. And my son, David, was 8 years old. And we were having this great trip. And then suddenly, mid afternoon, I fell asleep at the wheel, having never felt tired that day. I fell asleep at the wheel and woke up bouncing along in the median between the eastbound and westbound highways. And when I, in shock, tried to pull my SUV back up on the highway, we started to roll. And we rolled and we rolled and we rolled across 2 lanes of highway into the grass on the side of the highway. And when we stopped rolling, my eyesight was gone. I couldn't see anything, but I could hear my son next to me in the passenger seat crying. So I knew that he was hurt, but that he was still with us. But when I started calling for Carrie and David, who had been in the back seat, there was no answer. And my eyesight started to return. And as I looked around and saw the destruction, and I couldn't find Carrie and David, and then suddenly I noticed that had been thrown from the car and they were in the grass, what feels like a half a football field away. I'm sure it wasn't that far away, but it did feel that way to me at the time. And when I realized that they were thrown from the car, I started screaming, I killed my kids. I killed my kids. I killed my kids. And that was just a really devastating experience. But in that moment, I still didn't know I still felt like there was a chance that they were still here or not. And I also had an understanding in that moment that they were either both here or both gone, because I could not imagine one of them leaving without the other. They had a very unique, special bond between them. But there were some very interesting things that happened that day, and even before that day. Before that, let me just go back to before that day, because in the month leading up to this accident, I'd had all these really interesting experiences that made no sense. And I had lost my brother to suicide many years before this, and it was around the anniversary of his death. And so I thought, well, maybe I'm having some lingering old grief experiences from his passing, but that didn't make a lot of sense either. But then I had these insights that made no sense. I'd gone to this funeral. I saw this husband um, who had just lost his wife, and I had all these insights about him and about the eternities, and I was like, where is this coming from? And I know I understand now from my perspective that my soul was aware that this accident was going to happen, that my kids were not going to be here, and that I was going to have great grief to overcome. And my soul was preparing me through this pre-grief experience that I didn't even understand at the time. And I say now, which I couldn't comprehend at the time of the accident, but now I understand that everything that I needed to heal, the things that I needed in order to heal, were present for me in the moment of the accident. So as the car was rolling, I heard a voice. It was very peaceful. It was very calm, but there was a voice in my head that said, bring your arm in. And somehow, miraculously, I had the presence of mind to bring my arm in. It wasn't long after that that I started hearing stories of people who had lost their arms in rollover accidents. So even though I'd lost my children, spirit, angels, those presences that were with me at the in the moment, that are always with me, that are always with all of us, were there helping me save my arm. Um, Another thing that happened is as I saw my kids out in the grass, and I there were all these people gathered around them. But later, as I thought about it, I'm like, there weren't a bunch of cars on the side of the highway. So who were all these people? And later I realized that it's very likely that I was seeing the angels that were there with my kids and comforting them and also comforting me. And of course, in that moment, I couldn't feel that comfort. As I laid in the hospital, so two ambulances showed up. They took our younger kids that had been thrown from the car to one hospital. We were in between, we were at the border of Alabama and Mississippi. So Carrie and David ended up in a hospital in Alabama. I learned this afterwards. And James and I ended up in a hospital in Mississippi. And as I laid on a striker board, and my injuries were fairly minor. My injuries were more emotional than anything else, but I did have some injuries to my shoulder and my wrist. But as I laid on the striker board in just complete emotional turmoil, just complete emotional turmoil, I had this vision of Jesus with me in a field, and he was comforting me and he was there with me. And when I focused on him, I felt peace. Even in all that chaos, I felt peace. And then I would lose that vision and I would go into panic again. And then I would go back into that vision and I would be calm again. But after a few hours and the nurses and so forth not answering my questions about Carrie and David, my aunt and uncle who lived in Mississippi showed up at the hospital, and it was then that he put me on the phone with my husband, and he told me that Carrie and David didn't make it. And that was the beginning of a huge journey in grief and self-hatred and regret and guilt and shame and all the things that you can imagine. It was just this onslaught of heavy, heavy emotion that I just couldn't wrap my head around. But as we were in the hospital, our son James had broken his leg pretty severely, his right leg. And the hospital, the nurses, the people that were around us, I remember them in the background. Now, this was Mother's Day, and I don't know if I mentioned that, but this was Mother's Day in 2007 when this happened. And I remember hearing people say, what is Dr. Rush doing here? The hospital was named after his family. He created the procedure that my son needed for his leg. And he was at the hospital that day, and everybody was amazed, like, what is he doing here? And he was an earth angel for our family in so many ways, because not only did he provide the medical procedure that my son needed to save his leg, but he advocated for our family throughout the process of needing to leave the hospital and helping us get our son home. We lived in Houston, helping get our son home, helping us communicate with the doctors in Houston what he needed. He was an earth angel. And that was another miracle. So there were so many miracles that happened within this tragic experience. There were so many miracles that could not be denied. As I was in the hospital, we were in the hospital for a few days, and there's so many things that happened, but I remember having just like the next day after the accident in this state of shock and despair and grief and everything. I had this knowing, I had this understanding that it was the spirit spoke to me and said, don't worry about what other people say. Don't worry about how other people react. Know that they're doing it. Anything that they say and do, they're doing because they love you, not because they understand. So I had this knowing, and it was such a beautiful gift to me for the months and years after that, where people would say things, and I remember being that way myself. Like, I still feel awkward sometimes, and I teach this stuff, but I still feel awkward sometimes when I'm with somebody who's going through deep grief. And so that was such a gift to me. It was such a gift to not hang on to other people's words and not create more angst for myself, more discomfort for myself because of what somebody might say. But this was just a tragic accident like this, an experience like this is an opening. It is a breaking down of everything that we are. It's a breaking down of our understanding. It was a breaking down of my understanding of the world. I had previously lost my brother to suicide. I had gone through a painful divorce from my first husband when my older three children were very, very young. And I had since remarried, and the accident was I was with my three youngest children. So we had six children that we were raising, but I had gone through a lot of grief before, and that informed my experience because there was a part of me, and I distinctly remember about a week after the accident, we were back home. And I remember sitting in my backyard, and I can remember exactly where I was. And I just remember being in that space and thinking, I healed from my grief before. Maybe there's a possibility I can heal from this. It seemed unimaginable to me in the moment, but there was always this spark of hope that there was healing available to me. And it took many months and almost 3 years to the day from the accident. I was in so much pain. Things got worse instead of better because I started beating myself up because I thought I should be doing better than I am. And when we think I should be doing better than I am, that is a shame thought. It is shame. We're shaming ourselves, saying, I'm not good enough. I'm not where I should be. And that shame just put me into a deeper and deeper pit of despair. And so things got worse instead of better. And at that 3 year mark, I was in a really bad place. And miraculously, my husband had a trip to London for work. And I learned later that he was afraid to leave me at home because I was doing so poorly. I didn't know that at the time. So he ended up taking me on the trip with him, and our one of our daughters went with us too. And as he was in his meetings, we toured London, but he had a day or two after his meetings where we went on a couple of trips around to see things. And one of the places that we went to was Stonehenge. And you're probably thinking right now, what does Stonehenge have to do with anything? But I just recently learned about the energy of Stonehenge, and I feel like it was part of my own personal healing experience was to be there at Stonehenge. I had no idea. But that day we went to Stonehenge and we walked around all the way around. It was so cold. So what I remember the most about it, we almost didn't get off the bus. It was so cold, but we walked all the way around. And then about a week later, I had someone at my church offer a special prayer on my behalf. And when that prayer was given, within 24 hours, I felt like a whole different person. And I experienced this miraculous healing that I could not have even imagined. I remember just leading up to that moment that I was like, I could physically feel and sense the darkness in me. It was so heavy and so all consuming. And I was walking around like a zombie. Like I could not be present in any way. And so I was just walking around in this zombie state. And then within 24 hours, I felt like a whole different person. But then new things started happening. And just a few years after that, so about 5 years after the accident, so 3 years after the accident, I experienced this miraculous healing. About 5 years after the accident, I had this meeting with somebody. I met somebody. I'd gone to lunch with some friends and was introduced to this person. And my mom was there, and she turned to me and she said, "Julie, share your story." And this man had had a remarkable story of overcoming bipolar depression. And so my mom turned to me and said, "Tell your story." And at that point, I was like, I just remember that, like, I can't tell that. I can't share that with people. But I did haltingly shared a little bit about losing our kids and the experience of how painful that was, and the miraculous healing that I experienced. And as we were leaving the restaurant that day, this man took me by the arm and he said, "Julie, you're supposed to do something with this." And it was as if God himself had come down and stood in front of me. It was like lightning bolt. It was like deliverance. It was like a message directly from God. Do something with this. You're supposed to do something with this. And so I spent the next few years trying to figure out what that was. But I also learned in that time, I began to learn, I feel like my angels just put so much guidance in front of me and put me in places where I learned techniques to communicate with my children. One of the things that I do to communicate with my children is I write letters to them, and then I write "Dear Mom," and I listen and I write down what I hear. The other thing that happened was that, and subsequently, I started to learn to communicate with my son too. It's crazy the conditioning that we have in this world, and the shame thoughts and the challenges that we have with what we think based on old beliefs. You know, when my brother died of suicide, I didn't know if he was okay. Like, I literally was worried about his soul because of the way he passed. And it took a number of years for me to decondition from that idea that he was not okay at the soul level because of what happened to him. And now I'm able to communicate with him too, and he's delightful, and he had such a sense of humor, and he brings that humor to me. And even when I wrote my book, I just felt like, and I have more books to write, but I just felt like I didn't write this. Like, who wrote this? And then I was like, oh my gosh, my brother worked for a publishing company. He was a writer. He was a English major. I'm sure that he was there in that space. We have so much spiritual guidance, and over time I just learned to connect to the angelic realm. I found my old journal recently where I had started writing it in 2010 when I was in my worst spot, because my therapist, who was extremely worried about me, had asked me to write some things. And so I saw these very painful entries. And then there was this break. And then a month after my miraculous healing, I started writing inspirational things. I started writing, and over time, since 2010, that turned into asking questions and then just listening for answers. And I got really attuned to my intuition, but learning to communicate with my kids, feeling at my soul level that they are 100% okay. In fact, I knew that the minute they passed. I remember a friend calling me at the hospital, and I said, Carrie and David are okay. I don't know what's going to happen to the rest of us, but I know they're okay. But there were, talking about the conditioned thoughts, like these religious conditioning that I had in my own heart and mind, and were really hard to overcome, because there were times after the accident where I felt like God was punishing me because I was on a trip driving on a Sunday. That's crazy. It sounds crazy to me now. And I remember saying to a friend, and this was at that point where I was in my worst place, saying to a friend, I feel like God's punishing me. And again, she was an earth angel that delivered an inspired message to me that I needed to hear. And she said, Julie, God doesn't do anything to punish us. Everything that he does is to bless us. And that is such a beautiful understanding. And when we start to take off the guilt and the shame that we carry, that's so oppressive, then we can rise above that. But when that man said, you're supposed to do something with this, then it took me forever to figure out what it was, but it was always in my heart and mind. Like, what am I supposed to do with this? What does that look like? And over time, I began studying to be a coach, and I developed a grief coaching program and a workbook, and so now I do a lot of that grief work. But that has morphed into even more, because then I discovered that all this work, that where I was learning to connect with the angelic realm, learning to connect with spirit guides and my intuition and those higher beings that are always with us, whether we can hear them or not, they're always there trying to communicate with us. And so when I opened myself up to this idea that they were communicating with me, that they wanted to help me, that just opened up a whole nother world. And I began channeling angels and sharing messages with people. And it's been a beautiful journey. But I think the big piece for me is just recognizing that when we go through tragedies, when we go through challenging things, it's a doorway, it's a path, it's a doorway to breaking down everything that was and building anew. And sometimes we get really stuck where we are in the energy of the tragedy, and sometimes people have trouble moving from that energy into the greater understanding that is being brought to them through the challenges that they have faced. It's not easy, but it is possible, and it is a beautiful space. I for a long time, it was hard for me to tell people that I don't grieve my children, because in our society, we equate grieving with love, but they're two separate things. Grief is not love. Love is not grief. They're two, and when we can separate grief and loss and love and see those as all separate things, then we're able to move beyond the grief, and the love is so much greater and grander. When I communicate with my kids now, they're the way they come through, like, I know it's them because I'm their mom, but they are just such beautiful beings of light that have so much to offer me and my family and all those that they have been able to influence. just through the story of their passing. Beautiful beings of light with so much love and compassion for all of us. And I'm just very grateful. I often say I believe at my core that we planned our experience here. And I believe at my core that my brother's passing was part of my experience in this life. My divorce from my first husband was a part of my experience in this life and part of their experiences too. It's not all about me. I think it's miraculous. I just get like overwhelmed when I think about like how things fit together and how everything can be for everyone's benefit. And when my children passed away, like that was part of my story before I even came. It's the reason that I had pre-grief before they even left, is because I knew in my soul what was coming. And my soul was preparing me. I don't know that we can ever be truly prepared for that, but it was preparing me. And sometimes I've gone, okay, how do I get off of this, tragedy, grief train that I somehow put myself on before I came here? But there's so much beauty in it. I remember my boys. So after Carrie and David passed away, and like I said, they were our youngest. Our oldest daughter was at college. Our second oldest daughter graduated from high school 2 weeks after the accident, went off to college. So I was at home with two teenage boys who were 15 and 12 at the time. And um, as I started to come out of the deep, deep grief, I had so much guilt about the way that I was raising my boys, because they were growing up in a very different household than my older girls had grown up in. And I remember just lamenting that and being sad about that. And I heard, Julie, this is their experience too. So their soul plan was to be here going through the challenges of teenage years with a mother who was completely checked out. That was part of their soul plan too. And it having that realization helped me to release some of that guilt, just recognizing that I couldn't just be okay, in a week. I needed that time to heal. Time is an element of healing. It's not the whole equation, it's an element. But we all are here with a soul path and a soul journey. And it's been fascinating to watch that soul journey emerge and move forward. And I'm grateful to be in a space where I'm able to share the possibility, not only the possibility, but the miracle of healing. And when I say miracle, people think, oh, well, it's just by chance. It's not just by chance. A miracle is a miracle, even when we do the work to create the miracle. When I heard that message that I was to do something with my story, and I was trying to figure out what it was, and then I found coaching, I thought, how can I share? How can I help people move through grief and find healing when mine was miraculous? Like, I can't promise this overnight healing. And then I realized that all healing is a miracle. And whether it happens fast or slow or over time, or however it comes, it's a miracle. But it's also a miracle that we can expect, that we can anticipate, that we can work towards. I often tell people, if you didn't know Hawaii existed, would you want to go there? Well, of course not. So if you didn't know that healing was possible, would you put in the effort to experience healing? And so many parents, especially who have lost children, don't recognize that healing is possible. So they don't even attempt to go there. So my main message is healing is possible. No matter what you've experienced, healing is possible. We have so much heavenly help for healing. And the other thing that, talking about the soul plan, talking about our soul plan, it occurred to me that before I came here, I had the choice. I could either be the mom of David for 8 years and of Carrie for 10 years, or not be their mom, because it was their soul plan to only be here for 8 and 10 years. There's no doubt in my mind. And so I had the choice, and I would choose every day of my life to have been their mom for 8 and 10 years here rather than not have been their mom at all. Because we equate grief and love, people feel like they can't let go of the grief. And this was even my own challenge of sharing that I let go of the grief, because I'm like, people are going to think I don't love my kids. If I share that I'm okay and that I don't grieve my children's loss, they're going to think I don't love my kids, which is not the case at all. I have such a deeper love for them now, even because of this shared experience, that I can't even communicate. It's a beautiful thing to rise above and to feel that love and to feel that connection and to let go of the pain of the past. When we let go of the pain of the past, our present and our future is that much brighter. So I'm grateful to have been able to share my story today. Thank you. You can find me give you the links to find me, juliecluff.com, Julie Cluff Coaching on Instagram, and Build a Life After Loss on Facebook. So it's a little bit of a smattering of different places, but would love to connect with you.